Hello, and welcome to the Biomass Magazine and Pellet Mill Magazine podcast. My name is Danielle Piekarski, and I am joined by our host, Anna Simet, editor of Biomass Magazine and Pellet Mill Magazine, as well as our guest, Bill Strauss. Welcome, Bill.
Oh, hello. Good afternoon. Good morning. Good evening, wherever you are.
Bill is the president and founder of FutureMetrics and a distinguished leader in the pellet industry. He was named one of the most influential leaders in the biomass sector in both 2016 and 2017 and received BBI International's Excellence in Bioenergy Award in 2012. We're happy to have you share your expertise, Bill, so I will turn things over to Anna, who has some questions for you.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Hi, Bill. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, I'm happy to join.
Yeah, so I just got to ask before we, talk shop, you're always on some kind of adventure. What's the latest one you've been on?
Well, actually, last week I spent the whole week in Japan. I just got back on Monday, just a few days ago. Today's July 27th, so that would have been the 24th. It was an interesting week. Had many meetings with Japanese trading houses, utilities, did some tours with some major players in the energy industry over there. And I say that the hot phrase of the week from my Japan visit was black pellets. Everybody I talked to was just hungry for some kind of upgraded pellet that would more easily substitute for coal, had a closer energy density to coal than white pellets, and of course also could sit outside and not degrade in the rain. So there's a lot of interest there. There's research and development going on. Some of the major coal importers in Japan are testing various types of black pellets. They're very serious about substituting pellets for coal in their big power stations.
That's really interesting, and I think maybe I'm going to have to add that to my list of topics for in the future. Have you on again, and maybe we'll talk about that.
Sure, anytime.
Sounds great. So let's get into what we're going to talk about a little bit today. Global wood pellet markets. I think maybe let's start talking about the industrial export market. Current events, specifically the Russian attack on the Ukraine and other market forces like inflation are really straining supply. Do you want to begin with maybe just sort of a high-level view of, what's going on, what we're seeing?
I'd be happy to. So, yeah, the industrial pellet markets have grown tremendously over the past 10 years or so, and actually over the past 20 years or more from almost nothing. As you may know, Anna, one of my colleagues at FutureMetrics, John Swan, actually filled and shipped the first shipload of industrial pellets ever to leave North America in bulk back in 1998. In fact, next year will be the 25th anniversary of that first shipment.
Wow.
So that is just how young this industry is. It didn't exist before that first shipment out of Western Canada. It went to Sweden. Last year, 2021, total exports in the industrial market was almost 23 million tons. The average growth rate over the past 10 years in the market has been close to 17% annualized growth rate. So the market is large, has grown tremendously, and we expect it to continue to grow, especially in some of the Asian customers and specifically Japan. So it's already turning into something of a mature market with 23 million ton a year volumes. But as you suggested in your question, recent events have really sort of turned things upside down. A highly disruptive period of time in all commodity markets, including wood pellets.
Right.
Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, those three countries, in 2021, the total exports was about 3.4 million tons. That was about 15% of the total global market in industrial wood or in wood pellets, or industrial wood pellets, I should say. And a significant proportion of that 3.4 million tons is challenged. A lot of that is not going to make its way into Europe. The certifications from SPP have been withdrawn, as have actually the other major certifying agencies, which means that Western European and UK utilities would not get the credits that they need to get for using those pellets. So it's highly disruptive. And you add to that very high energy prices in Europe. There's a strong demand for heating pellets as natural gas prices and heating oil prices are just crazy high. And so when you add all that up, the market is super short right now.
Right.
Spot prices are well over $300 a ton in Western Europe. If you go back a year and a half or 2 years ago, it was much lower. The average spot price over the last 10 years has been about $165 a metric
Wow.
ton. So it's almost double what it's been for some time. And then to your last piece of your question about inflation, that's, of course, obviously driving prices at the end user end for other alternatives to wood pellets, whether it's coal for power generation. Coal prices today were almost $400 a ton, thermal coal, just crazy high. If you go back a year or two, it was like $60.
Oh
That's
my
like
goodness.
5 times higher.
Mhm.
It's pretty crazy. But inflation is also impacting the supply side. High diesel fuel prices are causing the delivered price of wood to pellet factories to go up, and quite significantly in some places. The larger the pellet factory, the longer the distance the wood has to travel to get to it, the more sensitive it is to changes in diesel fuel prices. At some locations, diesel fuel is 60% of the cost of delivered wood. And diesel fuel prices have essentially doubled in the last year and a half or so. So you're seeing delivered wood prices increasing pretty dramatically across the board. And of course, a lot of these pellet factories, their revenue side is based on long-term offtake agreements, most of which actually have no direct adjustment mechanism for changes in input costs like wood prices. They may have a fixed adjustment, but not an indexed adjustment that changes with higher wood prices. So that means margins are getting squeezed at the supply side.
Right. Wow, lots going on. So, Bill, kind of a follow-up from that. We're going to see the shortfall from that volume, not coming from Russia and Belarus. Where are these countries who might experience or are looking at shortfalls? Where's the extra supply or additional supply going to come from? Where do you think it's likely to be sourced from?
Yeah, that's a super important question, and it's probably a question that's pretty impossible to answer.
Yeah.
Because there really isn't much slack capacity in the markets. Most of the industrial pellet plants are built against an offtake agreement. So their production is pretty much committed to their buyer. The likes of Enviva or Drax, the big producers, or Highland or Fram, they don't speculate in the markets and hope and build a big, $200 million pellet plant and then hope somebody will buy the pellets.
Right.
They have a buyer before they invest in those new mills. So typically they commit around 80% of that mill's capacity. They never commit 100% because the mill may not be running or may have some maintenance issues or who knows what. So there is some slack capacity in the mills, and if the mill runs above 80% of its capacity or 75 or whatever the offtake commitment is, they may have some extra capacity that could find its way into the spot market. but there isn't much, and definitely not 3.4 million tons worth
Right.
of slack capacity. So just about everybody you talk to thinks there's going to be, for a variety of reasons, a very difficult winter, especially in Europe this coming year. We're not sure how it's going to play out. I think European countries need to start working right now and trying to figure out what the solutions are, but we'll see. It's going to be
Right.
tough. Obviously, Anna, to build a new pellet factory from the day you decide you want to do it until it's making pellets is a, at best a year and a half, and that's super optimistic. A couple of years to do that. So there's a long lag between the need for new capacity and the actual production from that capacity. So there's no short-term solution right now. What may happen is, some of the Southeast Asian capacity, which some of that is built around the spot markets in Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia. If prices are high enough in Europe, Western Europe, we may see shipments going all the way across the Pacific or maybe across the Indian Ocean. I'm not sure what the shortest distance is, but from Southeast Asia all the way to Europe to fulfill needs. That could happen.
Interesting. Okay, thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
Let's shift gears a little bit, and now let's talk about the domestic wood pellet industry, maybe focusing on the U.S. and Canada right now. We are seeing high fossil fuel prices, high oil prices, and you see these lower, much more stable costs for wood pellets. You also have the BTU Act here as an incentive. We've had that, the tax credit. So what have you been seeing and hearing? What do you see as producers are ready for an early buying season? You told me previously that you expect demand to be pretty high.
Yeah. Yes, I think we're absolutely certain that demand's going to be high. Assuming heating oil prices and propane prices and even natural gas prices stay high. There's no question that we're going to see an increase in demand. The installed base of pellet stoves and pellet boilers is growing. We know that demand is essentially off the charts for those systems, whether it's a freestanding appliance like a stove or a central heating system like a fully automated pellet boiler. I mean, it's an interesting time because heating pellet prices have gone up some in the Northeast, for example, but currently, given heating oil prices, it's still almost half the cost of heating oil to heat your home with pellets.
Wow.
It's a huge savings. And it actually creates a really interesting situation for homeowners and businesses who are interested in putting in a pellet boiler, for example. If you finance that boiler, the finance cost plus the pellet fuel cost is still less than what you would pay for heating oil. So your annual financing cost plus your annual pellet fuel cost is less than what you would pay annually for heating oil, which means you can put a new pellet boiler in the basement or wherever in your building, not spend a penny, and actually save money immediately. If that's not a situation for growth, I don't know what is.
Wow.
So, I know it's an unusual time with the heating oil prices being so high. So, we do see a potential for that. And, there is enough capacity in the domestic markets for the most part to meet that demand.
Yep.
But we would expect typically when there's high demand and high growth periods, you'll see some new projects coming forward. And we're aware of a few that are in development phases. So we expect to see some new heating pellet production capacity here coming online in the next year or two.
That's great to hear. So, we talked a little bit about how inflation was affecting, the industrial markets. How are our domestic producers being affected? And do you think it's affecting them more so than the bigger players, or, is it about even?
Yeah, it's certainly affecting all pellet producers because the delivered cost of wood, the feedstock that you make pellets out of, is heavily dependent on diesel fuel prices. So they're all impacted. But a smaller pellet mill doesn't have such a large draw radius. If it's in an area with a good sustainable wood supply, which they all should be and all pretty much are, then a small mill only has to reach a little ways to get enough wood every year to feed its demand, its needs. The large, 500,000, 600, 700,000 ton mills in the southeast need a fairly large radius for drawing wood. The farther you have to go, the more sensitive your wood costs are to diesel fuel prices. So I would, the smaller mills are certainly impacted, but on the diesel fuel price effect, less so than the large mills.
Okay.
But with that said, there are other factors on wood cost, and that's, is there other reasons to harvest? Typically, no landowner is going to harvest just for the pellet industry. They harvest for the saw logs, the higher value portion of the tree that they're growing in the working forest. I mean, these tree farms, there literally are farms, and they're farming trees, not, corn. It just takes a while for the crop to grow. But they're growing a crop to harvest and use for forest, for wood products. And the primary use is lumber. So that's where the value is. It's the leftovers from those harvests that either go to a pulp mill or maybe a pellet mill, and also the byproducts from the sawmill. So if sawmilling activity falls, that means there's less saw logs being harvested, which means there's less leftovers and also less sawdust. So, fluctuations in the housing market and demand for lumber have an impact also on wood costs. We're seeing some slight decline in new housing starts. So it hasn't really filtered back through yet in a big way into the lumber production markets, but it's a possibility.
Interesting stuff, Bill. And then I guess, of course, we do have to, take into consideration, I've heard the cost of pallets have tripled for domestic producers, the cost of packaging and all that. That's also probably
Absolutely.
a factor.
Yeah, you're right. You make a really good point, Anna. If you're selling into the bagged pellet market, you've got this extra cost of bags, pallets, which is almost the same as pellets when you say it, and the wrapping that goes around those pellets. It depends on where you are, but it's $15, $20 a ton added on to your production cost, and with inflation, it's probably more. But we've also seen, just the heating pellet prices go up fairly significantly in the past 6 months. So I think the prices of the retail prices for heating pellets are going up fast enough to allow the producers to keep their margins in pretty good shape, and they can do that because all the alternative fuels have gone up even more, like heating oil and propane. So they can manage a higher pellet price. It's still a good deal.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Bill, I think, we'll wrap it up with that. It's such an interesting conversation, and I bet we could probably continue chatting for the next hour about this. And I have a ton more topics that I would like to discuss with you, but, we'll have to have you on again soon, maybe to discuss black pellets or carbon.
Sure. It would be my pleasure. Anytime.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. A pleasure as always. And for those listening, thank you so much, and stay tuned for our next episode.